The weight of 73. The Thornweave catacombs smelled of stone and silence, and 300 years of darkness. Elena descended the final steps, her lantern casting shadows that danced across walls, carved with names she couldn't read. The air grew colder with each step downward, until her breath misted before her face and the chill settled into her bones like a living thing. The key Mordain had given her turned smoothly in the ancient lock, the mechanism responding as if it had been opened yesterday rather than centuries ago. The door swung inward without sound, revealing the chamber beyond. 73 pillars rose from the floor in a perfect circle, each one carved from black stone that seemed to drink the light. Names were etched into each pillar: Cale Thornweave, Theron Silverlight, Morgana Ashford, and 70 others who had burned themselves to ash in this very room. Elena stepped inside, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The chamber's center bore permanent scars, black stains spreading outward in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. This was where the void flame had burned, where 73 mages had stood in a circle and consumed themselves piece by piece to forge a prison strong enough to hold the Void Weaver. She set her satchel down carefully and began unpacking her monitoring equipment. Crystal resonators to measure magical density, thermographic plates to track temperature fluctuations, a notebook already half filled with measurements from previous sessions, the tools of a researcher trying to quantify the unquantifiable. How much of Cassian Netherbane's soul remained, and how quickly it was burning away. The chamber watched her work with patient attention. Elena had felt it the moment she crossed the threshold, the sense of being observed by something vast and ancient that existed in the walls themselves. This place remembered what had happened here. It remembered the screaming and the burning and the slow, terrible transformation of 73 human beings into weapons of pure corruption. And now, it would witness it happen again. One more time. One more mage burning himself away in the desperate hope that he could accomplish what had required so many before. "He's going to die down here," Elena said to the empty chamber. Her voice echoed off stone walls that had heard similar words 3 centuries ago. "You know that, don't you? Whatever happens tonight, Cassian Netherbane won't walk out of this room as himself." The chamber offered no response. Only silence and cold and the weight of 73 names carved in black stone. Elena finished setting up her equipment and checked her pocket watch. 7:45. Cassian would be at the palace now, standing in the grand hall with 200 other magisters preparing to participate in King Aldrich's doomed conventional reinforcement working. She'd wanted to go with him, but he'd insisted she come here first. Get everything ready. Make sure the chamber was prepared. Make sure there was a place for him to die, if it came to that. She sat down with her back against one of the pillars. Theron Silverlight's memorial, she realized, reading the name carved above her head. The magister who had maintained Void Flame for 3 full minutes during the original sealing. Longer than anyone else. Longer than Cale Thornweave himself. Theron had requested execution 3 days after the sealing was complete. His family had granted him the mercy. Elena opened her notebook to a fresh page and began writing, documenting the chamber's ambient conditions before Cassian arrived. Temperature, 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Magical density, negligible, though the resonators showed faint traces of residual corruption in the geometric patterns at the chamber's center. Air pressure, normal. Her own heart rate, elevated. She was terrified, not of the magic or the corruption or even the Void Weaver itself. She was terrified of what she'd seen in Cassian's eyes over the past 3 days. The way he looked at his own reflection with clinical detachment, cataloging the spread of dark veins like a researcher documenting an interesting specimen. The way he'd smiled while holding Void Flame, that expression of terrible rightness that suggested the corruption wasn't just consuming him, it was becoming him. The way he'd forgotten to eat unless she reminded him. Forgotten that his body temperature was dropping to dangerous levels. Forgotten, sometimes, to respond when she said his name. Elena pressed her hand against the cold stone of Theron Silverlight's memorial and wondered if anyone had tried to anchor him. If someone had stood beside him during those final days, desperately throwing ropes to keep him connected to his humanity, while the Void Flame burned everything away. Probably. And it probably hadn't mattered. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Elena's head snapped up, her hand instinctively reaching for the monitoring crystal in her lap. But it was too early. Cassian shouldn't be here yet. The conventional reinforcement wouldn't begin for another 15 minutes, and even then it would take time for the working to fail catastrophically enough to provide cover for his departure. The footsteps grew closer, measured, deliberate, not running. Elena stood, positioning herself between the door and her equipment. If this was palace security, if someone had discovered Mordane's arrangement, the door opened and Cassian stepped through. He wore his formal magister's robes, the deep blue fabric marked with the silver insignia of the Royal Academy. But the robes couldn't hide what he'd become. Dark veins pulsed visibly at his temples and throat, spreading down beneath his collar like roots seeking deeper soil. His eyes? Elena's breath caught. His eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire visible surface, as if someone had filled them with liquid shadow. They reflected her lantern light strangely, creating the impression of depth that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. "You're early," Elena managed. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "The reinforcement hasn't even started yet." "I know." Cassian closed the door behind him and locked it with a gesture. Magic responding to his will without verbal command or somatic component. The ease of it was wrong. Forbidden magic should require cost and effort, not flow like water. "I left before it began." "Why? Cassian, if someone saw you leave?" "No one saw." He moved past her toward the chamber's center, his footsteps making no sound on the stone floor. "And it doesn't matter. The working will fail whether I'm present or not. My participation would only feed the Voidweaver more power." Elena watched him examine the black stains at the chamber's heart, his expression clinical and detached. This was what terrified her most. Not the physical corruption, but the psychological distance. He looked at the place where 73 mages had died with the same analytical interest he might give an academic text. "Cassian." She moved closer, forcing him to look at her. "What happened at the palace?" For a moment, his black eyes focused on her face. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite recognition, but acknowledgement. As if he'd forgotten she was there and needed to recalibrate. "I stood in the Grand Hall," he said quietly, surrounded by 200 magisters preparing to pour their power into a working that would accomplish nothing except feeding the entity we're trying to contain. I could feel the ley lines beneath the palace, Elena. Feel the corruption spreading through them like poison in veins. And I realized... He stopped, turned back to the black stains. "I realized I was standing in the wrong place. The Grand Hall is for conventional magic, for traditional workings and acceptable costs. This," he gestured to the chamber around them. "This is where the real work happens, where mages come when they've accepted that saving the kingdom requires becoming its nightmare." "You're not a nightmare." Elena's voice was fierce. "You're trying to save everyone." "Am I?" Cassian's laugh was soft and terrible. "Or am I just another weapon being forged from corruption and necessity?" Cale Thornweave thought he was saving the kingdom too. So did Theron Silverlight and Morgana Ashford and 70 others, whose names are carved on these pillars. They all believed the sacrifice was worth it. He finally looked at her again, and Elena saw something in those black eyes that made her heart clench. "I read Cale's final entry," Cassian continued. "The one he wrote 3 days after the sealing, before he requested execution. Do you know what it said?" Elena shook her head. "It said, 'I no longer remember my sister's name. I know I had a sister. I know I loved her. But when I try to recall her face or voice or the sound of her laughter, there's only void. The working took everything, not just my future, but my past. I am a weapon that has forgotten what it was forged to protect.'" Cassian's voice remained clinical and detached, as if he were reading from an academic text rather than describing his own probable future. "That's what's coming for me, Elena. Not just death, but erasure. I won't just lose my life. I'll lose everything that made me who I was. My memories of Leanna, my friendship with you, the reason I'm doing any of this." Elena crossed the distance between them and grabbed his hand. His skin was cold, far too cold, his core temperature continuing its steady decline, but she held on anyway. "Then we fight for every memory," she said firmly. We document everything. We anchor you to who you were. We don't let the void take anything without a battle. Elena. No. She squeezed his hand harder. You promised me you'd try to come back to yourself. You promised you'd fight. That promise doesn't become void just because you've read Kale's journal and decided your fate is sealed. For a long moment, Cassian stared at their joined hands. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, he seemed incapable of that now, but recognition. Acknowledgement that she was right. You're correct, he said quietly. I made a promise. I should honor it. The clinical phrasing made Elena's heart ache, but she nodded. This was victory, measured in the smallest possible increments. He'd acknowledged the promise. He'd agreed to try. That was all she could ask for. Good. She released his hand and moved back to her equipment. Then let's get to work. Show me what you learned from the essence cycling technique. Show me if you can extend your working time. Cassian nodded and moved to the chamber's center, positioning himself directly over the black stains. The geometric patterns seemed to respond to his presence, their darkness deepening slightly. Elena activated her monitoring crystals and prepared her notebook. This was familiar ground, the ritual of practice and measurement that had defined the past 3 days. Except now, the timeline had collapsed to hours instead of days, and the chamber itself was responding to Cassian's corruption with disturbing recognition. Above them, in the Grand Hall, 200 magisters would be beginning their conventional reinforcement working, pouring their power into wards that couldn't hold, feeding the Voidweaver with every spell they cast. Below, in a chamber that remembered the deaths of 73 mages, one more weapon prepared to forge itself. Cassian closed his eyes and began the working. Void flame erupted from his hands, black fire that cast no light, only shadow. It spread outward in geometric patterns that perfectly matched the stains on the floor, as if the chamber itself was guiding the magic's flow. Elena's monitoring crystals flared, registering corruption levels that made her breath catch. But Cassian's expression remained focused and controlled. He was implementing the essence cycling technique from Kale's journal, creating a closed circuit that redirected corrupted essence back through uncorrupted channels. The effect was immediate and visible. The dark veins in his skin began to pulse in a new pattern, organized, geometric, deliberate. Instead of spreading chaotically, the corruption flowed in controlled circuits. The void flame burned steadier, its edges sharper. Elena started her timer, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 90 seconds. Cassian's breathing remained steady. His hands moved through precise gestures, shaping the void flame into increasingly complex forms. Testing, pushing, measuring his limits. 2 minutes, 2.5. The chamber's temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Elena's monitoring crystals showed corruption density increasing, but at a slower rate than previous sessions. The essence cycling was working, not perfectly, but measurably, extending his time, giving him more minutes before consumption became complete. 3 minutes. Cassian's eyes opened, still completely black but focused and aware. He looked at the void flame in his hands with clinical satisfaction. The cycling is holding, he said, his voice steady despite maintaining the working. Corruption burn rate reduced by approximately 30% from baseline. Projected maximum working time, 40 minutes at current efficiency. 40 minutes. Not enough to match what 73 mages had accomplished. Not enough to seal the Voidweaver permanently, but more than he'd had before. More than the 25 minutes he'd managed yesterday. It was progress. Terrible, corrupting progress, but progress nonetheless. Elena documented the measurements with shaking hands, trying not to think about what 40 minutes of sustained void flame would do to the person she cared about. Trying not to calculate how much of Cassian would remain when those 40 minutes ended. Above them, somewhere in the palace, the conventional reinforcement working would be reaching its crescendo. 200 magisters pouring power into failing wards, feeding the very entity they were trying to contain. And beneath the palace, in a chamber that had witnessed this exact sacrifice 3 centuries ago, one more mage burned pieces of his soul to forge a weapon that might possibly be enough. Cassian held the void flame for another minute, then carefully released the working. The black fire dissipated, leaving only the permanent stains on the floor and the deeper shadows in his veins. He swayed slightly, and Elena was there immediately, steadying him. 4 minutes, she said, checking her timer. 4 minutes sustained working. That's significant improvement. Not enough. Cassian's voice was distant. Kale managed 2 minutes 40 seconds. Theron Silverlight reached 3 minutes. I need to exceed them both, and I need to do it for long enough to complete the ceiling working. You're getting closer. Closer isn't sufficient. He pulled away from her support, standing on his own despite visible exhaustion. The mathematics remain impossible. 1 mage against a threat that required 73. 4 minutes of working time when I need hours. Elena wanted to argue, to insist that 4 minutes was better than 25 seconds, that progress was progress no matter how incremental. But she saw the truth in his black eyes. They both knew 4 minutes wasn't enough. Not for what was coming. A distant sound echoed through the catacombs, muffled but unmistakable, shouting from somewhere above. Then a low rumble that made the chamber's walls vibrate. Elena's blood went cold. What was that? Cassian tilted his head, listening to something beyond normal hearing. His expression shifted to grim certainty. The conventional reinforcement is failing, he said quietly. Faster than anticipated. The wards are collapsing in cascade. Another rumble, louder this time. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. The 73 pillars seemed to lean inward slightly, as if the chamber itself was responding to the crisis above. How long do we have? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer would be terrible. Minutes. Cassian moved back to the chamber's center, his movements precise despite exhaustion. The working will collapse completely within 30 minutes. When it does, the wards will fail across the entire capital. Shadow spawn will manifest everywhere the barriers fall. He looked at her, and Elena saw the weight of 73 deaths reflected in his eyes. I need to act now, Cassian said, before the collapse is complete. While there's still structure to the wards I can work with. You're not ready. The words came out desperate. Cassian, you've only managed 4 minutes. You said yourself you need longer. I need to try. His voice was gentle but absolute. Because if I wait until I'm ready, everyone dies. The mathematics are impossible either way. At least this way, I have a chance. Elena wanted to protest, wanted to grab him and refused to let him burn himself away before he'd had enough time to prepare. But she saw the truth in his expression. There was no more time. The crisis had arrived ahead of schedule, and they had to face it with whatever inadequate tools they possessed. Then I'm staying, she said firmly. Right here, monitoring and documenting. If you're going to do this, you're not doing it alone. Cassian opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something in her expression must have convinced him that arguing was pointless. Very well, he said quietly. Thank you, Elena. Another rumble shook the chamber. Closer now. More violent. The wards were failing faster with each passing moment. Cassian positioned himself at the chamber's center and began gathering power. Void flame flickered to life in his hands, then spread up his arms in geometric patterns that matched the permanent stains on the floor. Elena activated all her monitoring equipment and prepared to document whatever came next. Success or failure. Salvation or doom. The transformation of Cassian Netherbane into something that might save the kingdom, or might become an even greater threat than the Voidweaver itself. Above them, the conventional reinforcement collapsed in catastrophic failure. Below, in a chamber that had witnessed this exact moment 300 years ago, 1 mage prepared to become 73. And deep in the Shadow Veil wastes, the Voidweaver felt its prison walls crack and smiled with patient, terrible anticipation.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.